Is wine really that complicated, or do we just make it so? Tonight on SIP episode 99, we break down the terminology of wine assessment. In doing so, we will give you a foundation that will last a lifetime of wine enjoyment. Joining us are Gene and Larry Rowe of Greyscale Wines, a luxury producer out of Rutherford and Napa Valley. You are in for a treat. Buckle up. So let us get started with what is foundationally going to be an amazing episode because we're going to be discussing wine terminology. And it is this type of topic and subject matter that actually makes us tremble a little bit at Cellar Angels because there is so much to discuss. But for the Sipsters that were here March 19th, 2021, you remember we did the entirety of Burgundy in 55 minutes. So that is normally a year-long collegiate course to discuss Burgundy, but we knocked it off in 55 minutes. This is only usually a half a semester course. So for those of you that are new, my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels. We are a direct-to-consumer wine company specializing exclusively in limited production wines only from Napa and Sonoma. And 90-some-odd% of the time, these wines are not in national distribution. So you cannot get them from your local wine retailer, and they will certainly not be at a big box location. There was some news made last night. Now, I'm not certain if you're aware of it. There was a lot of television and a lot of things going on last night. And part of the reason was because we launched a new website. So I'm not certain if you knew that last night, but that actually happened. So I'm going to show you what the new website looks like. And there we have it. So there's new colors, the marketplace is here. The collection of premium Napa Valley and Sonoma wines corresponds with the wine tasting events. All of you that have purchased a sip kit are drinking Gene and Larry's Greyscale Cabernet Sauvignon to taste along with them. You can purchase the kit. You can reserve your seat here for sip every Friday night. And then as you scroll down, you'll see the marketplace. Greyscale, that we're going to talk to at length this evening, was founded by Gene and Larry, who are our guests. Tonight, most are tasting the 2017 Cabernet Sauvignon from George III Vineyard out of the Beckstoffer conglomerate of vineyards. And it is something to behold. Now, this website is brand new. It is less than 12 hours old, maybe 15. And there are already some kinks in it. So we know that there's, as websites are in technology, there's definitely going to be some challenges. It is, the old website was good, but we wanted to make it better. This new website is fantastic. It's going to get better. And if you've been around with us long enough, you remember the old website, it functioned. It was working car. It moved from point A to point B. Wasn't pretty to look at. But it served a purpose. We decided to have an overhaul, and we decided to, we can make it stronger, better, faster, $6 million man stuff. And we're getting ready to do it and launch it. So Doug, if Doug is on, he is on. Doug, I love the picture of your wine cellar. We know you had a problem with the coupon. That has already been fixed. So please, and that order has been placed on your next sip kit. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Nope, Ivy said you did it. Maybe not. Larry and Izzy, hello. Good to see you. Jan, good to see you. Jane, it's good to see you. And let's get to Monday's pop quiz winner. What smells of cat pee on gooseberry bush? This is actually perfect for the terminology foundational lesson today. The answer was B, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And that was answered correctly by Jeff and Jane, who 2 weeks in a row now, apparently it doesn't matter where they are because they answered 2 weeks ago the question correctly from Hawaii. This time they were back home. And that answer, correct me if I'm wrong, Mission Control, was 2 minutes and 47 seconds after the email hit. So I'm getting the thumbs up from Mission Control off camera, which does all of the viewers no good whatsoever. But rest assured, it was 2 minutes and 47 seconds. So all of these words behind me are just some of the descriptors that are used with words or used with wine. And I can tell you, it's confusing. And when Mission Control and I owned a wine store in Chicago, a retail wine store, this was the most often requested topic. I love wine. I don't know anything about it. Help me understand wine. And you have to give yourself a little bit of a break. Genesia, nice to see you. Eileen, nice to see you. Because if you look at anything from a subspecialty standpoint or a passion project or an interest of pursuit, let's say you're in medicine, let's say you're in law, let's say you're in architecture, let's say you're in music, learning an instrument, art, sailing, all of those vocations and passions have their own distinct language. Wine is no different. This is the evening that you are going to be learning some of the foundational building blocks to be able to understand wine better, describe it better, appreciate it more, and have a much greater fulfilling wine journey. And we can think of no better people to do it than who we have as our guests tonight. And I'm thrilled to welcome back Jean and Larry Rowe of Greyscale Wines. Thank you guys so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having us, Martin.
Good to be here.
It's always good to be on SIP.
I'm so happy you say that. Your payment will be in the mail. Thank you. The process of wine tasting seems to be all over the board, but really, Larry, there is a scientific process. And before I get to that, I've already broken my protocol. I have a lot of notes, folks. There's a lot to get to this evening. Jean, Greyscale Wines. You grew up in and around a vineyard. So how did this come about?
Well, the seeds from Greyscale came from my childhood. My dad grew grapes and made wine while we were growing up. So obviously it was a major part of our life. We lived 40 minutes from Napa Valley. So we were up tasting wine and taking classes quite frequently, which kind of led into some wine travel. And Larry and I made a trip to Bordeaux back in the early 2000s and fell in love with the wines of Bordeaux. Came back, just so happens we had a rather major wedding anniversary. We thought, let's make some wine in celebration of our wedding anniversary. Turns out there was a company in San Francisco called Crushpad that would do that for you. So we made a barrel of wine from Stagecoach Vineyard, Cabernet, and fell in love with the process. We love the product, and so we kind of evolved into Greyscale as it is today.
And where does the name Greyscale come from?
Greyscale, we come from technology, and grayscale is a term that's used to describe all the shades of gray between white and black. We felt that really kind of fit with winemaking because there is no set recipe with winemaking. You know, it's not what black and white each year, you know, unlike beer that is more black and white. With wine, you know, you're constantly shifting up and down that spectrum. And so as part of that whole process, we came up with a tagline that said, wine is neither black nor white, it's always shades of gray. So
I like it. Very true. And Colin, nice to see you. He has the same last name as me. That is impressive. Jim, Karen, Catherine, I'd like to see all of you here. The aspect, and Jean, I love the fact that you grew up in such proximity and had the influence and kind of the aha epiphany in Bordeaux going, this actually would be good. I like this beverage. But when you decide to build Greyscale, and Larry chime in as well, you have to realize, okay, I need fruit, I need a winemaker, I need a facility. So how did you decide on A, the winemaker, and B, your fruit sources?
Well, when we made the private barrel from Stagecoach, Crushpad assigned us a winemaker, and his name was Kian Tavakoli, and he's the same winemaker we have today. So we've been with him for, I guess, 16 years, something like that.
Wow.
And he understands us and we understand him. So the communication is the most important thing, and that's what we did. So Crushpad, as many people know, went out of business in 2012. And there was a question as to whether we were going to continue. But it turned out a former executive at Crushpad who had left the year earlier, Thomas Bogetz, formed a co-op. And he and Kian were the founders of that co-op. And there were, I think, eight, nine people that were in it, including some other people on this call. And so we started, you know, we just kind of shifted from where we were going before to the facilities that Tom was able to lease up by St. Helena. And that's what we started doing. So the big deal on the co-op is we go out and buy fruit, and as a group, we decide individually what we want, and then they go put together a subset of what what we want, and they go find the fruit sources and see if we can get contracts to get them, and then we make the wine.
And we've been lucky enough to get some pretty nice.
We go for really high-end fruit.
Yeah.
That's been true from the very beginning, largely because my take is the first thing you have to do to make really good wine is get outstanding fruit and just don't screw it up. And so, you get good fruit, you have a fantastic winemaker, you got a good chance at producing some outstanding wines.
Right, and then just stay out of the way.
Yeah. Well, no, we stick our fingers in.
It's kind of like, well, it's just like cooking in the kitchen. You got to stick your finger in now and then and sample and see what's happening. But Kean that was a nice person to meet serendipitously. So walk us through a little bit about his pedigree, because it's quite impressive to have him as a winemaker.
Well, Kean got his bachelor's degree in genetics from UC Davis and studied viticulture and enology there. And his family heritage is Iranian, although it turns out the family came from France. And so he speaks a little French, but and was certainly educated in his family about wine. So he graduated in the early 90s and then did the usual thing of flying around the world, working at various wineries, including several in Bordeaux, which we thought was pretty exciting.
Super
And
cool.
He ended up at Clos de Val and spent, I think, well, first he went to Opus and then, but he wasn't a winemaker, he was in the lab. And then he went to Clos de Val and he was an assistant winemaker and was responsible for all the reserve programs. And so that's kind of how he really cut it. And then he went to Crush Pad. And the thing I used to say to him, and he completely agreed with it, is he was making 200 different wine products per year from 20 vineyards. And so over the eight years that Crush Pad was in existence, you just think about the diversity of experiences he was able to get in terms of fruit sources and different styles of wines and different ways of doing things. And so it was really a fabulous thing.
That's incredible. It's like being in 200 different kitchens and producing something with different
Exactly.
ingredients.
Most winemakers, they don't get to,
once a year.
it's once a year,
Yeah.
and, maybe 10 products, unless you're somebody like Gallo with 150, but that's not just one winemaker.
No. Well, this is good. I love the portfolio. And what are we looking at right now from a case production standpoint?
Me? Yeah, we're small. We're under 500 cases. It goes up and goes down every year based on a whole bunch of things. One of the funny things about fruit is you contract for, let's say, 2 tons. And when it comes time to get the fruit, they call up and say, by the way, you're going to get 1.25 tons. Or they'll call up and say,
You'll get 3.
You've got 3, or they'll call up and say, you've got to take 5. And won't you pay us for it? So it's an interesting negotiation.
I like it. And hello to Amy and hello to Marilyn. Hope the knee is getting better because you have a cruise coming up. So under 500 cases, impeccable fruit source and an amazing winemaker, which leads us to probably the foundational aspect of, in order to enhance this journey, people need to know what the heck everyone else is talking about. And there are literally thousands of words, aromas, not taste, but we're going to get into it now. And I think, Larry, you and I talked earlier this week with regards to one of the basic concepts is the scientific process of understanding wine. And you look at the senses, and the senses are, sight, smell, touch, hearing, and what are the other senses?
Taste.
Thank God there's only 5.
Actually, they believe there might be 1 or 2 more.
That is true. That is true. So if we look at sight of wine, and this is where Mission Control is going to put up a visual, this from the assessment process of understanding how to describe wine. We always start at the top with our eyes. We go eyes, nose, mouth. So from a sight standpoint, here's a very simple tool, attribution to Madeline Puckett from Wine Folly, who produces amazing tutorial items and teaching aids. But there's actually, Larry, a way to describe the different colors of wine, is there not?
Well, you just, from the scientific perspective, you try to pick a color and identify that by a name. And then when people look at wine, they want to use the same name, so that when somebody else hears that name, they have an idea what color you're talking about. And so that's the whole principle, is to have an approved set of terms that you can use, which other people will understand what it means. Now, somebody else could come along and say, oh, this wine looks like gooseberries. And sure, that's a perfectly good word. Gooseberries have a particular color. It's a little green. And that would be a perfectly okay color to use. And if you do, that's fine. But in terms of communicating with other people, particularly in scientific experiments where you want repeatability, you want to be using the same word for the color that you're describing, so that when somebody else says that word, you understand what it is that word means in the context of wine.
Right. A perfect example is across the top row here of whites. So these are all technical terms that are used in the Court of Master Sommelier, the Masters of Wine, the WSET program. This is uniformity. This is, to Larry's point, if you are talking with the wine aficionado around the country and you say, I'm looking at this wine, it's a deep yellow, they know to a degree what you're looking at. And they also know that it's not going to be on the other end of the spectrum, pale straw. That helps the viewer and the observer narrow in on potentially what is the type of wine that you are looking at from a varietal perspective. So pale straw, there's not many Chardonnays that come up in the pale straw area. And conversely, there's very few Sauvignon Blancs or Chenin Blancs that come into the deep yellow. Now, it varies, of course. This is kind of like accounting, and accounting has its own rules, as we all remember, but they also have the GAP rules. These are generally accepted accounting principles. So these are generally accepted wine principles. I have in front of me an aged Spanish wine that, oh, go ahead. That is a 2003 that almost looks orange. And this is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, oxidation. And this is from one of our favorite producers, Lopez de Heredia. But it's a 2003 aged white Rioja wine. So the colors will give you an indication. But to Larry's point, that's the uniform language. It's people know those, and reds have the same way. So there's ways that you can get better at this. It's usually just practice and taste testing and getting together with friends. And as Mission Control likes to say, drinking, just drinking, actually, frequency. Fun fact, your palate is best at 10 o'clock in the morning. And that Monday through Friday as well. So just go ahead and tell the folks on Zoom you're just tasting. So you have these special terms for white. You have similar terms for red. So give me some of those. I know ruby is one, garnet.
Yeah.
And they describe what from a color standpoint?
Well, you're trying to describe the specific. I mean, how dark a color of red is, for example. So with ruby, and in this chart, and that's what's nice about this chart, is actually, if you look at the row of reds, there are 3 that are ruby and 3 that are purple. And the adjective pale, medium, and deep gets applied to each. So you have pale ruby, medium ruby, deep ruby, and you can see it has more density of red. Then you have purple, and it's pale purple, medium purple, deep purple. And then the next row you have garnet, where it's a little bit off, more like a garnet stone. But again, it's pale, medium, and deep. So what's really nice is that it's easy to remember what this chart is, and there's a lot of structure that makes it easy to decode what it is going on.
What do you think the odds are that the 70s rock band Deep Purple were wine lovers?
Yeah, I don't know.
But in all seriousness, that is the foundational chart. Chad Angelo says 0. I appreciate that, Chad, of Angelo Cellars. The interesting thing is, if you are talking at any tasting in any city in the United States and you say this is garnet, the people in the wine industry are going to know exactly what type of color you are talking about. But if you were to say something that this is a maroon or an orangish maroon, it doesn't transfer. So you can say that the edges of the wine have a brickish color. As it ages, the wine will get a little bit lighter at the edge, the red wines. But once you can fundamentally learn this type of language, and it's very easy, you just have to continue to, do tastings, look at Sauvignon Blancs, look at Chenin Blancs, look at Chardonnays, look at Viogniers, and look at that color of gold and yellow across the spectrum. And then Larry, I don't know if you want to discuss brightness on site.
Well, yeah, I mean, some wines look a little dull and others don't. Some of it has to do with the color, and other things can impact it as the lighting, because the lighting can have a big impact on what you're actually seeing. So yeah, I mean, the brightness does make a difference, but I mean, you can only control so much. And the question is, don't spend $1 million to control something for which it doesn't really matter how precise you are. So
Right.
I think that's the rule of thumb.
And getting back to the site of things, it's why wine people are very fastidious about how clean their glasses are, because they don't want fingerprints on them. They want to look at the glass and see the wine inside. And probably the single most important aspect or tool that you can have in wine assessment is a white piece of paper. So you want to have a white background to look at the wine through with a nice light above you and stuff like that to be able to assess the color. And now you've learned the description of what the colors mean and what they could potentially be telling you from a varietal identification. But then we move from sight on to smell. And there's all sorts of different, oh boy, this is where we get crazy, because from a sight standpoint, it's challenging to learn the language. But Gene, from a smell standpoint, it's equally challenging. And why are women, Gene, so much better with aromas than men?
Because we tend to be in the kitchen a lot, smelling a lot of food, tasting a lot of food, smelling a lot of food. That's my belief anyway.
I would agree with you. If you look at the first 18 years of genuinely a male's life, they know cut grass, locker room, diesel or gasoline, petrol fuels, cut wood. That's really about it. We know 4 odors until we're 18, and none of them are really related to wine, although wood is. But you can do yourself a great service by grabbing any number of aroma kits that are available online. And this is a good start. So these are not inexpensive, by the way. This one has got, I think, 64 different aromas in there. Some of them start with 12 aromas, 16 aromas. And the other thing I encourage everyone to do is go to farmers markets, get access to fresh produce, go to a culinary cooking class and learn different things as it relates to what these aromas are. I mean, I didn't know what star anise was until I was in my 40s, very deprived. I knew what Brown's chicken was. I knew what fish sticks were and tartar sauce, because that was the consensus of my diet for the first 20 some odd years. Star anise, not so much. So how many aromas can we smell, Gene?
How many?
400. And in fact, it's probably more than 400.
That should have been a quiz question.
Yeah, no, perhaps more. So it turns out that the sensor for smell is on the, you have your nasal cavity, and then it comes back and connects to your throat. Right. And kind of in the top of that action, there's an area up there where there's some organic material, which is in fact has nerves wired into the brain. And so there are 400 distinct, I think it's 400 distinct locations with a wire out of it, so to speak. And so you can get a smell is then a combination of those 400 things. So actually, if the brain was wired to be able to handle all of it, it would be a much, much larger number than 400. But it's at least 400.
You're 100% correct, Larry. It's interesting. The industry standard that we use and have learned is that the brain is capable of smelling and identifying over 10,000 scents.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So now you wonder why all these terms behind me are used for wine description. Exactly right. So now we've identified the wine via sight, and we've got our color picked out from a descriptor. Now we are smelling things in the wine, and we're assessing the aroma of the wine. And I'm curious, from the aspect of aroma, where fruitiness comes from. Where does herbaceous?
Fruitiness, I mean, if you look at the chart, now I'm using a different one than you have, but all of the aroma charts always have 2 or 3 layers. And the innermost layer is kind of the general category. And in the general category is fruity. And fruity is basically anything that we would think of as fruit. But the next level of the category, you have citrus, berry, tree fruit, tropical fruit, dried or cooked fruit, and other. So that's the next category. And then you go down further, each of those categories. So fruity berry has 4 different specific words: blackberry, raspberry, strawberry, black currant, or cassis. So it's really just a question of building this category of words. And with fruity, they want to get all of the words that relate to something that comes from fruit. And it could be
Right.
stone fruit, or as they refer to it, tree fruit, cherry, apricot, peach, apple. And the idea is you pick one of those categories. Now in the chart I'm looking at, the outer level has 83 distinct things, and there are 24 subcategories and 11 of the top level categories. So I mean, it's pretty complex, but you just have to pick which ones you find, and you can pick at any level.
And I think it can be generalized to a great degree. For example, white wines, we're usually looking at citrus flavors, tropical flavors, maybe apple. Red wines, we're looking at raspberries, blueberries, plums, cherries, etc. So, I mean, I don't think we need to get this precise, but
Well,
No, I don't want to
Yeah.
memorize 83 scents
Yeah.
and descriptors,
yeah,
8 of them. But I do think, Larry, to your point, and here's another flavor reel. And by the way, these are very inexpensive. You can get these for $13, $15, $18, and they're a godsend when you're first starting out. Just if you look on the left-hand side at about 9:30, you see, well, I think I'm smelling something like hay and straw. Is it dried hay? Is it herbaceousness or vegetative? And you can move in, and this all gives you an idea of a guide with regards to what you could potentially be smelling. And then that will lead to some instructions on what you might be tasting. Because everything, I think, is a rule out process. You're trying to get down to, what am I tasting? Where is it from? Old or new world? How old is the wine? Just different types of things to help guide you with regards to understanding a little bit more about what you're tasting. And all of it's to enhance the enjoyment of it. And I think the yellow is interesting too, because there's a little bit of your sweetness: honey, butterscotch, soy sauce, chocolate, molasses, caramel, and caramel. I mean, it's all over the board. But definitely, if you want, pick up one of these flavor wheels. You can have in a kitchen drawer somewhere. Most of us do, by the way, and you just pull that out and start running away.
and pull it
Go ahead.
out at the farmer's market.
Yes,
That's how you can really start to define or discern these different flavors.
absolutely. The smell aspect, I think, is untouchable with regards to how much more fun it is when you can start identifying aromas. But I do think, don't be intimidated if you're in a group of 6 people and 5 people say, I smell strawberry, and maybe you smell cherry. If you smell cherry, go with cherry. Don't let the psychosomatic influence of others influence what you're smelling, and certainly don't ever let it influence your enjoyment of it or feel intimidated by it. Now we're going to move on to taste. So this gets back to, Gene, what we talked about a little bit earlier with regards to body complexity and balance. And in there are subcategories of alcohol, tannin, and acidity. So describe, if you will, what we mean with wine, another universal term called body.
Well, body is kind of the impression of the wine on your palate, the fullness. I think there's been some comparisons to different types of milk. Non-fat milk is going to be a little lighter bodied. Maybe skim might be medium bodied, or I might not have this quite correct, but I think it kind of conveys the message. And then cream or whole milk will be a little fuller, more full on the palate.
It's a perfect analogy. And when you think about skim milk as opposed to heavy whipping cream. And when someone says this is a very full-bodied wine, go towards the whipping cream for the sensation in your mouth. When someone says this is a very light wine, think of it as skim milk. So that it's a good range with regards to that. And someone is asking, does the color actually make a difference in taste? If someone loves a pale Sauvignon Blanc, pale pink, or pale salmon rosé, does the color influence taste at all?
I don't think so. No. I mean,
Okay.
to the extent that the color is there because of some chemicals in the wine, it could conceivably, those chemicals could then have an influence on taste. But I have not seen anything that says that there's a real correlation that you can figure out by looking at it. And in fact, that gets us to a point that's one of the things really confusing about all this wine identification stuff. It turns out you would think as humans we could detect what a food is. And it turns out the food scientists, they do these experiments, they mash up bananas, they blindfold you, and then put the banana mash in your mouth and ask, what is it? And most people can't determine what it is. Even though they're tasting it, they do not recognize what it is. On the other hand, if you let them look at it as they put it into their mouth, they go, oh yeah, that's banana, okay? Well, that's food. What happens with wine? It turns out the experiments have been done where you get a glass that's black, pour a liquid in it, covered up so they can't see the liquid, and they don't know, is it white or red? And ask a very simple question. Is it white? Is it red? And can't do it. You just can't predict what it is.
Yeah, and those glasses are super cool. I've seen them. I think they're ceramic of some sort or black glass, but you're right. People can't tell what color the wine is in a glass that they can't see. And which is why, and Larry, you do this a lot. I think you guys do it weekly. Blind tastings are so much fun, where if you are actually, the bottle is in a brown paper bag, you have no idea what it is, and you are left to your own devices, because psychosomatically, if you see something, as you just pointed out via testing, your mind will start triggering things of what that potentially is. But if you can't see it, you have to interpret based upon sight, smell, taste. Super cool. The other important descriptor that we talk about with taste, in addition to body, is tannin. So who wants to take a stab and describe what tannin is?
Well, I mean, tannins, well, of course, they come from the skin, the seeds, stems, perhaps from the cluster, and also oak barrels. So they're naturally occurring in the grapes, but they're the ones that kind of give you that puckery feeling in your mouth. Sometimes your mouth will be completely dried out, and those are the tannins that are at work there. It's kind of more of a tactile, it's kind of a feely thing rather than an aroma or flavor.
Well, and this, getting back to Larry's point about foundational language, this is absolutely one of the fundamental building blocks of wine assessment, is the description and notification or noticing tannin. And Gene's right, there is a puckerness to it. And I've heard it analogized a couple different ways, where if you drink, imagine a cold glass of black tea, and you're going to feel that grit might be strong, but you're going to feel that puckering aspect in your mouth. That's not too dissimilar to peanut butter. That is a very, very tannic wine. So now tannins,
peanut butter is a tannic wine, you say?
it's not a good one.
Let's drink.
But I mean, Gene was right. You can get tannin from grapes, and there's very specific areas in Napa, like Howell Mountain, depending upon where you are on Howell Mountain, is known for having very tannic wines. And what can you do with the tannic wine? How, when you are reading wine descriptions, when something says it has very silky tannins or fine grain tannins or chewy tannins, what does all that mean? Either one of you.
Well, I think it's often the age factor of the wine, and the tannins will subside with time. Grippy tannins tend to be, and I think in younger wines where they're still dominant. You know, when we talk about wine balance, we talk about all these different aspects of wine being in balance. And in younger wines, the tannins will often be stronger. But the tannins are important. I mean, they provide the structure and the texture and the sense of weight to the wine. So, I mean, they're not bad things. They're very important.
The other thing is tannins are in fact a chain. And over time, the chains break down and reform. And that's sometimes referred to as resolving the tannins. And so a silky tannin is something that's been resolved and you sense it, but it just puts a little angst in the wine, gives it a little umph to something attractive in your mouth.
Interesting. Well, let me ask a quick poll question as it relates to some of the things we've been discussing, and then Mission Control is going to let people turn their cameras on if they would like. So we are talking about the senses. We let off the show with talking about the senses. Which of the 5 senses is most important in wine assessment? Smell, taste, sight, hearing, or touch. And most people think that hearing doesn't play a role. Trust me. Trust me, until you hear the cork pop, nothing happens with wine assessment. And then, unless you hear bubbles going in the glass, Chad, I like fingers in my glass. 2 fingers. So we have a dead heat with 7 seconds to go. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wow. So sight got crushed, hearing loser, touch, body, mouthfeel, not good. Smell and taste, 50-50.
Yeah.
Larry, I'm going to defer to you as the former professor. Which is the most important sense in assessment of wine?
Smell.
Smell, and why?
Well, amongst the elements of the wine, it's the one that can be most descriptive of what's happening to the wine. And part of the reason is when you do wine tasting, you smell, and then when you taste, you want to taste the taste that you smelled.
Right.
And if you didn't, then you kind of go, what's going on? Why did I get a smell, but I didn't get a taste? That doesn't make any sense. Something's odd about this wine.
And it's
So-
interesting because Jan just actually mentioned that in the chat. Smell often doesn't match the taste in her experience. And
Mhm.
so when that happens, Larry, when you are smelling something and then you go to taste it and it doesn't taste anything like you have smelled, what is the cause and what is the meaning?
Well, this is getting to the very complexity of the chemistry involved in a glass of wine. The chemistry is incredibly confusing and very complicated. And so they can't really predict why it is. Something will show up in the taste and not be there in the smell, and vice versa. They know pieces of that story, but they do not have the complete story. It's why when you think about evaluating wines, you don't just go take a chemical sample and evaluate the chemical sample. You do the chemical sample to get the metrics that actually tell you something about the wine, but then you have to do the taste, smell, and sight to kind of complete the understanding of what this wine is all about.
Interesting. And so now if you're an engineer, Chad, and have been paying attention to what we've been discussing, we've got one linear axis with regards to color. Then we've got another one, or 4 or 5 of them with regards to aromas. Then we've got another one with regards to taste. And then we have Jean educating us on tannins, which comes through the whole aspect of it all. And when any one of these are out of balance, you have an experience of probably less enjoyable than you had hoped. And then we haven't even begun to discuss 2 more attributes that we can add in: alcohol and sweetness. So talk to us about the relationship between those 2. And Larry, I know you are familiar with this, or Jean. Jean is just, I have the alcohol part down. But I'm curious, the alcohol and sweetness, because these are also axes that cross. So you can have the alcohol really, really high and the sweetness is inverted. And then as the alcohol or as the sweetness, later fermentation, and Chad, you can chime in because Chad's a winemaker and knows the answers to all these. But tell me, Jean, about the alcohol and sweetness and where that comes from.
Well, and the alcohol, of course, is produced from the sugars in the wine. So, and at roughly what, 50%. So if the wine comes in at 25 bricks, which is an indicator of sugar, the alcohol will be roughly around half that, 12.5, which is not Napa Valley standard. But the alcohol in a wine, when you're assessing a wine, I think is it can feel like a burning sensation if it's too high, or out of balance, I should say.
Yep.
Or just even a warm sensation on the tongue. But do you have anything more to add to that?
Nope.
The alcohol, you're right about the burning sensation. And it seems, I hope the pendulum is shifting a little bit. Alcohol has a lot to do with temperature and climate. And you look at some of the old world wines from Italy, Spain, France, another country called Spance, lesser known country. Italy, Spain, France, Germany, their climate is not very warm. So their alcohols are extremely lower than North America, New Zealand, Australia, South America, Argentina, Chile, where it's warmer climate. So that heat produces a heck of a lot more alcohol and more sweetness. And it's amazing that burn that you talk about, Jean, you're absolutely right. There's been times where I've had 14.5, 15.5, nearly 16% alcohol Zinfandels from California, and you feel it, and it is burning. And so would that be an element where I'm not tasting any fruit? You're talking about a wine being, quote, another foundational term, out of balance.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. But you know, the business about heat versus sugars is not strictly linear. Yeah, it is certainly the case. Napa is hot or hotter. Paso Robles is certainly much hotter than Sonoma, than Napa. And consequently, their alcohols tend to be a little bit higher. But you get other things happening. For example, where we live, we're behind a mountain and not in Napa, down in the Bay Area. And there's some people that have vineyards out here, and they have a very hard time getting higher alcohols because they can't get enough sugar in their grapes. Why? Because in the afternoon, the fog comes over the hill and covers the vineyard, so it doesn't get the sunlight. So because they don't get the sunlight, you do not get the conversion of sugars, and so you don't have any sugar, you don't have any alcohol. Jean and I just got back from a trip to Sicily, and we visited a winery in southern Sicily. Okay, this is a hot region. There's no question this is a very hot region. Turns out they do not get very high alcohol wines. In fact, they're really like natural wines, the light color, kind of the lighter wines. And the reason? Because midway through the growing season, the temperatures go up to 100 degrees. And the grapevines actually shut down at 95 degrees. They just shut down. So if the grapevines are shut down, they're not going to be delivering stuff to the berries, and they're not going to be accumulating sugars. And in their case, the summer is so hot, they will shut down for several weeks. And then eventually the temperature will come down, and then they will start the plants will come back alive and start doing their thing. But they're lucky to get 22, 23 bricks, which means they're down at 11.5, 12%
Right.
alcohols. And yet it's a very hot region.
This is Sicily.
This is
very
Sicily.
hot.
So you kind of have to be a little careful about what it is, but the real principle is, if you get sugar, you will have alcohol, presuming you let fermentation go to completion. In other words, you don't stop fermentation, in which case you'll end up then with a sweet wine.
No, and perfect. And you talk about the balance of that with the sugar, and bricks is another foundational term with regards to the measurement of sugar. And you will hear every single winemaker talk about it at harvest. Well, we had to get the fruit in. It was at 24 bricks or 26 bricks, whatever it means. So now, thanks to Gene, you can just say, okay, if it's at 26 and this is going to be a 13% alcohol wine, give or take a couple percentage points, because it's half. And in California specifically, you are allowed to, from an alcohol content on the label, you'll be able to say, and Chad can correct me, I think within plus or minus 0.5%
No,
of,
no, it's
what is
one.
it? 1%?
California, it's plus or minus 1%.
So if you have a 13.9% alcohol wine, it could technically be 14.9?
Yes.
Yes.
And Italy is 0.5%, France is 0.5%. And the other thing is that sometimes people lie, that what's on the label is.
No.
No.
No gray, no gray area there.
My evidence for that, we met a guy who was from Canada, and he was talking about the Canadian authorities whenever they were importing wines from the United States. At one point, they wanted to test to see if the alcohols were the correct level. And so they actually took the wine down, to take a bottle, take a sample, and go get it analyzed. And they found that maybe 20%, it's probably less than that, but roughly 10 to 20% were not within the range of what the alcohols were supposed to be.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But
Very
too,
challenging.
the varietal will be different. Like you said, Zinfandel a lot of times is traditionally higher. The sugars get higher quicker, and they have a little higher conversion. So if you pick Zinfandel at 26, you're going to get 15 and a half. Syrah is also kind of like that too. A lot of times if you get a Syrah that's gotten a lot of hot weather, it's going to be a higher alcohol. And one other thing is that most people that are not versed a lot in wine and they get a high alcohol wine to taste, all they'll taste is the alcohol. They can't get past that. So all these sensory things we've talked about, they shut down because all they can taste is the alcohol usually, is what I've found.
And it's 2 points on that, Chad, and you're absolutely right. So now with the Zin that's measuring 14.6, 14.8, in theory, that could be 15.8. So you're getting very close to port. And that's one point. The other point is with regards to alcohol, to Gene's point earlier, when the tannins are there, when the fruit is there, and the balance is there, you can have a high alcohol wine. If it's all there,
Yes.
It works.
It works.
Yes. Yes.
And so
but to get high tannins, high alcohol, all of that is very difficult. If you get it more in moderation, it's a lot easier to put that all together.
Yep. And then also when you have these high alcohol wines, they're difficult to pair with regards to certain foods and things, because that adds another whole attribute to it. And I want to touch on exactly where we're talking about the Greyscale wines hail from. So I'm going to hopefully share with you what the Cellar Angels website will look like in about a month. There we go. So I'm sure we're allowed to use these, right? Beg for forgiveness, as the saying goes. Let me actually find out where we are. There we go. So for those of you that are new, many of the sipsters on this evening know exactly where our playground is. And it is Napa and Sonoma and this beautiful blue orb that we like to call home. When we think of wine region, and show of hands, who's been to Napa or Sonoma? Beautiful, beautiful. I like it. This is the region we chose after owning a bricks and mortar wine store in Chicago for 7 years and realizing that these small limited production wineries have no chance at getting national distribution because, to Larry's point, at under 500 cases, there's not 6 distributors that are going to pick them up and get them in major markets. So we decided to put forth a luxury platform where they could have an outlet to wine lovers like you. And we are huge fans of Napa County and Sonoma County. It's what we know. I've been there 60 times in the last 20 years, and meeting people like Chad and like Gene and Larry and learning their stories. Every wine tells a story, and the Greyscale story, as you heard with regards to Keen the winemaker, and also where they source their fruit from is extra special. And so similar to last week when we had Katie Miliavaca on, and they source their wine from the Antinori vineyard, but they can't put the Antinori vineyard on their label because Vince Traverso is good friends with Kirk Vengi, and Kirk used to have the fruit contract and gave it over to Vince, and you scratch my back type of thing, but it's not on the label. This is a pretty special place right here. This winery here is Camus. This is, I don't even know how many acres is owned here, Gene and Larry.
250.
250 by Beckstoffer. This is the Beckstoffer offices. This is part of the George III Boulay Vineyard for where Gene and Larry source their Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, why there and why that particular fruit source?
Well, we used to be getting fruit down in Coombsville, which we really liked, and we in the first 4 or 5 years we used that, and it was outstanding fruit, great wine. But this is a very special vineyard. This was developed by George Latour at BV. It was Ranch Number 3, as it was called, and BV got into financial trouble in the end of the 90s, and so they sold it. And Beckstoffer was smart enough to buy it, and then he played his Intel inside game, where if you want to use his name and the name of the vineyard on the label, you have to pay a very high price. I think it's actually $25,000 a ton to get this fruit. But it's a big vineyard. It's 250 acres, and so there's a lot of fruit that there are not enough people that are willing to pay that amount, and so they sell the rest of it at the Napa Valley average, which at these days is around 8,500 a ton. And so this particular block that we were in, the vines are 30 years old. They're just absolutely fabulous, right in the middle of the valley. It's one of the great vineyards in Napa Valley.
And our style has always been more of an old world style, but Napa style, if you will, old world Napa, in that we're not, big fruit in your face. We're more, I think our cab is a little more silky and softer. And that's what these wines produce. So it really fit with what we were trying to do.
Well, the other thing that I want people to know about this vineyard is, and Larry, you hit upon it, Mrs. Thomas Rutherford first planted this vineyard in it was like
1890s.
1890s.
I think.
So if you've ever eaten at the Rutherford Grill or heard of the Rutherford AVA or Rutherford Dust, that's Mrs. Rutherford and the Rutherford family. And then Boulay bought it in 1928. It was under the amazing guidance of Andre Telesheff, and his hand is all over some of the best wines in Napa Valley. Beckstoffer acquired it in 1988. To give you an idea of some of the names that source fruit from George III Vineyard or George III, Camus, Myriad, Schrader, Chateau Boswell, Newton, it goes on and on, B Cellars, and all of those are over $100 a bottle. Alpha Omega, exactly. So this is
$200 a bottle.
Exactly.
So
this
Gene, Larry and I's aren't.
Yeah.
No. So this is precisely what we talk about at Cellar Angels. Anyone can go pay $200 a bottle. It's nice to get fruit from the same source at a fraction of that. I want to talk some negative stuff, which Gene and Larry, we don't often do, but we have not talked about flaws in wine. And one, I think, of the most popular prevalent flaws is the description of a wine being corked. What does that mean? And technically, and what does it present itself as a perception wise?
So it's a chemical, and the chemical, you get the chemical in the wine. It's a flaw that can be introduced by mistakes in the winery. Sometimes it can get in there because of stuff in the winery that actually gets into the vats and whatever. The easiest way to tell it is if you ever open a bottle of wine and you smell it and it just smells off. It really just smells wrong. set it aside, let the odor blow off for a little bit, or maybe even pour it into a carafe. And if after that you taste it and you still have the odor, and also the wine seems kind of flat. It
loses its fruit.
loses its fruit. It just isn't there. What you have is a flawed bottle of wine. And the fact is, these things used to happen much, much more frequently back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But these days, it doesn't happen nearly as much. I think the numbers on the order of maybe 1 to 2% is what people typically see. But it happens. It's just,
and it's interesting. In many of those sensory kits that we showed earlier, there will be a little vial of cork. And if anybody grew up in the Midwest and had a crawl space that was damp and dank, or a dog that came in from the rain and just sat there and you smelt wet dog, that's cork. Those folks in Florida that have slabs, you may not have experienced this aroma before, but definitely wet, damp, dank crawl space. And to Gene's point, you get nothing when you're swirling the glass. And then you put it in your mouth and all you feel is liquid. There's no aroma, there's no sensation, there's nothing. Good. So that's one flaw. And just because you think the bottle is off, it doesn't mean it's corked. I do think that cork seems to be this ubiquitous terminology that's used for, could be over sulfured, could be oxidized, could be like this wine that we showed earlier that has some oxidation on it. Oxidation is a good thing. From a standpoint of wine, it's what you want to a degree. From an aging process, it helps, as we talked earlier, to soften some of those tannins over time. The 2017 Cabernet Sauvignon. Now let's bring it all full circle, Gene and Larry. Let's talk about what we're looking at from a sight standpoint. What color is this?
We don't have our white sheet out. I always say deep red, but I don't know if that's a standard.
Yeah, no, it's deep red color.
Deep red. I didn't. If
Okay.
that's legal or not. We
Your
still
wine.
consider this
You
a
can make it
pretty
legal.
young wine.
Well, now, how do you know it's still a pretty young wine?
Well, I think it has vibrancy in the color.
Agreed.
And actually, as we taste it, I'm still getting a lot of nice acidity in this wine.
Well,
And
well,
I,
and
maybe
certainly
I'm
from the color, you can generally assess a wine's age when you look at the center of the wine to the edge. And this wine, as a 17, that color is consistent from the center of the wine all the way to the edge. There's very little variance. Now, if it had gotten lighter at the edge, or like we talked earlier, a little bit paler, or maybe some brickish color. But right now, I think this is spot on, still extremely consistent from center to edge.
So let's go back to human perception. In our blind tasting group, we were tasting Pinots from Burgundy one time. And we had a 1995, a 2005, 2008, and a 2010 wine. Actually, we had a couple more, but this is good enough. And the 95 and the 2008 were the same producer, just a different year. And one wine stood out head and shoulders amongst all of them. It was the youngest tasting. It had the best looking color. It was vibrant. It was just absolutely fabulous. And we all were arguing about, was it the 10 or the 8 or maybe the 6? What was it? It was the 95. And there was one that was very brown, and that turned out to be the 08. So, you know, you want to think that you can look at some of these indicators and identify the wine, identify which wine it is. Now, can't do it. And you would think you could try and predict the age. Turns out there are cases where it just doesn't work out. And so your comment is absolutely correct, Martin, that a lot of times if you see that variation, you think that there is likely some age. But unfortunately, it might be the youngest wine in the flight.
Right.
It might have been stored inappropriately, might have been engaged in some heat problem or some other problem. But so it's part of the joy of tasting
Absolutely.
wine.
Yep.
What is it?
Well, and to your point, and someone actually commented on it in the chat, there's no orange colors or lighter colors at the edge whatsoever. And this is a 17. So it's still relatively young by Napa standards. It's 5 years of age. It's a very young cab, very vibrant. So Larry, to your point, you could have a 95 in that lineup that was just impeccably made from a fantastic fruit source. And if those vines are, 30, 40 years of age, this is standard operating procedure for those vines. And you would think that it's a 4-year-old wine when in fact it might be a 30-year-old wine.
Yeah.
So that's all right. So now we've got color. What are we looking at from aromas?
Well, the aroma on this, we get fruit aromas, very much cherry and a touch of bacon. The bacon is unusual. Since we're doing the same wine year after year, we kind of look at what the tasting notes are we do and see how they change year to year. And they do change because the wine changes. And the wine changes for 2 reasons. One, it's a different vintage, so the fruit you get is different. But we also adjust the blend each year. So we are adjusting the blend to try and make the best wine that we possibly can. This particular wine is 97% Cab and 3% Cab Franc. Most years we will put 4 to 6% Merlot in there. And oftentimes we'll also put in some Petit Verdot or maybe a Malbec. But this year we tried all those other combinations and it didn't sing. And when we just took those things out and put in just the Cab Franc, this wine just stood up and said hello. So we decided that we'll go with this one. So another thing about the aging thing might be, and what the tasting notes are, could have to do with the blending components.
I'm also getting a little dried herb in this, maybe.
Okay. And what would you pair this with?
Tonight we're going to do pork chop.
Martin. Pork chop?
Tonight.
Awesome. Any can't miss pairings with the 2017?
Goodness.
Steak.
Good steak.
Yeah.
Man.
Nice.
Yeah, I like
chicken that has a little bit more body, no more flavor intensity to it. I mean, this is even though this is soft, it's not in your face with fruit. There's still plenty of fruit, and the black cherry is in there. And I think if you're going to pair, look for something that has cherry in it, or that would go with cherry.
Okay, I like that. And I also like filet, MJ Cab Franc. I missed it. Someone just bumped that. Personally, Hans is going to go with a second bottle to pair it with. So I'm a big fan of that decision. Cab Franc is quite often the great facilitator in cab blends. That is true. And I think I see, Gene and Larry, a huge influence of your Bordeaux trip and kind of the wines that you produce.
We're Bordeaux house.
That's what we are. That's what we do.
There's been discussion of introducing Syrah and other alien varietals to our wines, and we've kept the course.
There are other very good producers in our co-op that produce those wines. We drink them. We drink them regularly.
But
they're within easy reach. They're within easy reach. You don't need to produce them, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So this evening, I see those harbor lights coming into view. The time has come. I want to thank Larry and Gene for just absolutely a fantastic time visiting, not only about the 2017 Cabernet Sauvignon, about the portfolio, the history, the vineyard source, but really helping us understand foundationally what are some of the basic terminology and aspects of wine assessment that are universal. So if you start using these descriptions as it relates to color, you start using these descriptions as it relates to aromas, and then you start weaving in the talk and discussion of body, complexity, balance, alcohol, and tannin, you will move from novice to intermediate to the wine person in the neighborhood. Just ask Jim B, and he will vouch for me. If you can reach him on Instagram, it's good stuff. I can't thank Larry and Gene enough. This, by the way, is SIP episode 99. We started this, and they were on when it was SIP episode 41. So they've stuck with us all that time. But we are marching towards SIP episode 100, which is going to be in 2 weeks. 100, and it's going to be a festival. Next week, there is no SIP, but if you are a wine club member, there is Meet the Winemaker with John Phillips from Inspiration. John is actually going to be joining us from Burgundy. He is in France and he is going to be tuning in at 1 a.m. to talk about that. Wine Club members also got a special treat, a canteen which holds 1 full bottle of wine. So I encourage you to chill your whites, throw that and take it to the picnic, take it to the child's soccer game. It will make that much more enjoyable. Kidding. I'm not saying that you should do that. That would be fine. But SIP episode 100, and it's going to be on Friday, because if it's Friday, SIP happens. Thank you, Greasies. You guys all take care. Be good to one another. Have a wonderful weekend, and wishing you all great health. Cheers.